Let me then turn to a brief introduction of our speaker and join me in welcoming Phyllis Zagano, who's an internationally recognized Catholic scholar and lecturer on contemporary spirituality and women's issues in the church. Dr. Zagano is well known in Catholic feminist circles for her sharp focus on women in the diaconate. I affectionately refer to her as Phyllis Deacon or Die Zagano for her deep and abiding commitment to bringing back the diaconate for women. Such focus is what it takes to make history, and frankly, the smart money is on Phyllis to get this done. Her extensive bio is on the Hofstra University website, where she's Senior Research Associate in Residence and Adjunct Professor of Religion. She received her BA from Marymount College in Tarrytown, her PhD from SUNY at Stony Brook, and 3 master's degrees from Boston College in Communications, in Literature from Long Island University, and Theology from St. John's. Dr. Zagano is the author or editor of 25 books in religious studies, including Holy Saturday, an argument for the restoration of the female diaconate in the Catholic Church, which is must reading for bishops whether they know it or not. She has a rare ability in the academic world to communicate erudite scholarship in readable, accessible prose. You could win the Rosemary Ganley Prize this year, Phyllis. No wonder her work is translated and cited so often. She did a book for preteens called Elizabeth Visits the Abbey, great title, about a young girl visiting the abbess who's her aunt, and I guess it's a crash course in the history of women in the church. She also did a lovely book called On Prayer, A Letter from My Godchild, a creative effort for which she won the 2004 Catholic Press Association Award. She's a versatile author whose work has been translated into at least 10 languages. She's lectured and done research in various places, Ireland being one of her favorites, and Rome being one of her regular stops. She's the founding co-chair of the Roman Catholic Studies Group for the American Academy of Religion and a member of several learned societies. She was appointed by Francis to the first papal commission for the study of the diaconate of women, That group eventually was kindly thanked kindly and replaced. There's now some odd claim that the reason they were finished is that they didn't quite come to agreement. Well, as any group purposely made up of people who see questions differently, doubtful they would have ever come to agreement. And I'm not sure, to their detriment, that there's a new Phyllis Zagano on the new commission, at least not as far as I know. Phyllis lectures widely at universities, conferences, churches, any place where people are interested in solid theology, clear presentation, and fair-minded debate. These are her hallmarks: solid theology, clear presentation, and fair-minded debate. She brings those hallmarks to Water today, for which we're deeply grateful. I have great regard for Phyllis, as you can tell. Even when we do not agree completely on a topic, which happens, she's always a good conversation partner. She has a marvelous sense of humor, an eye for detail. She's a keen judge of character and a tireless advocate for women. I have begun to think of her as Saint Phoebe incarnate, the only named deacon in the Bible. On our What We're Reading page for September 23, which will be going up soon on our website, this is what we said about just church. What would a just Catholic Church look like? And why is it imperative that one emerge? Read Phyllis Zagano's primer on the topic. She's best known for her tireless efforts to get Roman Catholic women ordained to the diaconate. This book shows that her commitment is set in scholarship, realism, and strategizing. You will want to read this book, but for today, you get something even better: a conversation with the author in the weeks leading up to the first meeting in Rome of the Synod on Synodality in next month. So thanks for joining us, Phyllis, and please share your opening remarks to a welcoming audience. I hope you feel at home.
Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, it is wonderful to be with you at the start of another academic year here in the Northern Hemisphere. It seems like there was no summer because I was speaking a lot in the Southern Hemisphere during the summer. But, today is the feast of St. John Chrysostom all around the church and all around the world. And I'm just reminded as we enter into the discussion about this book that Chrysostom, invokes the concept of the church being the entire assembly of members. and that to me is what the synod and synodality is about. And I'll read just a little section from this book that we're going to talk about. The important point, no matter the terminology, is that the meetings of synods in the past required consensus. Cyprian of Carthage wrote that nothing should be done without the consensus of the bishop, his council, that is priests and deacons, and the people. The apostolic canons, for example, called for the local bishop not to act except with the agreement of his senior bishops, who in turn was not to act without the consensus of all. And I'm just preparing a little piece to run about the synod and this discussion on women in the diaconate. And if you think about see, judge, act, which would be the basic things for the movement for discernment, you have to recognize that opinion is not a fact. Opinions are not facts. Pace opinion writers, opinions are not facts. And we need to understand what the facts are, see, and then make a judgment, in this case, a prayerful judgment in the light of the Holy Spirit, and then act. And who acts? Well, the bishop acts. The bishop acts, as Cyprian of Carthage says, with the consensus of his priests and deacons and bishops, but not without the consensus of all. And so it's a very interesting time we are in to try to understand that we're not involved in a parliamentary procedure. We are involved in a synodal procedure, and that's where folks are getting a little confused. So I'll talk a little bit about the book, and then we can talk about whatever you want to talk about as we go forward and honestly prepare for the time when we're all going to be in prayer. And we're not only going to be in prayer on this topic, but we're all going to be in prayer. The book begins, or the epilogue is from William Butler Yeats, his poem, The Second Coming. And the central part, if you know the poem, turning and turning in a widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. And that's really what was on my mind as I wrote this book, really only just last summer. They kind of rushed it to have it ready for the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, at which I spoke in 2023. So the problem is, or the question is, how can topics related to women in the church be addressed in a consensual manner, but such that the center can hold? And that's the tension. It's about communion, in communion of us all with the whole church, the mission of the church, and then the question of participation, who gets to do what. If you read the Synod documents, you'll note that the order of the documents has changed. The original documents were communion, participation, and mission. Now it is communion, mission, participation in the instrumentum laboris. And I think that's extremely important to recognize that we, first of all, determine that we are together on all this. We figure out what we're supposed to be doing. And after that, we figure out who does what, to put it in the most administrative terms. So the book has 3 sections. It's called Just Church, Catholic Social Teaching, Synodality, and Women. So startlingly enough, the 3 sections are Catholic Social Teaching, Synodality, and Women. And there's a lovely foreword by Richard Lennon at Boston College, which I did not attend. My master's degree in communications is from Boston University, from the School of Public Communication. One of my predecessors on the faculty, actually, I taught there too for a while. One of my predecessors on the faculty was Alexander Graham Bell, who invented a little bit of a interesting invention that we've all come to know and love. But the way in which the book is structured, I first lay out, well, what is Catholic social teaching? You know, what is always with women in mind, and I go through the points of Catholic social teaching, and you can hear them, the typical categories. You can hear in them, even by their titles, that these refer to women. And that's, I could write a whole nother book just really focusing on Catholic social teaching documents and how they approach problems and deal with and mention women or don't mention women. But the fact of the matter is, all Catholic social teaching intrinsically has to be aimed at women. I mean, half the planet, and responsible for, I would say, more than half of what goes on. So you have the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Well, the rights of women workers, and particularly inside the church. I've written actually a couple of little things on that, on the dignity of women workers in the church. And if you hold on to that and get full circle and start to think about women in the diaconate at the end of the story, and remember that most deacons are volunteers, and there are 47,000 deacons in the world, and many of them are not very well treated. And even in canon law, the deacon is not required to have remuneration, but if the deacon does have a full-time job, the deacon is required to receive proper remuneration and benefits for the support of, at this point, his family. So it kind of, the argument then for women in the diaconate would be that it increasingly, in diocesan structures at least, where there is a competition for a job, the deacon wins. And I've talked to bishops about that, and they say, well, they'd rather have somebody who's trained, ordained, and given faculties by them than someone who hasn't. I mean, it's you know, as simple and as complicated as that, because the problem with the diaconate is that a lot of deacons don't have the have not had the opportunity for an in-depth spiritual formation, even though they are formed according to the 1998 directory, with spiritual, human, intellectual, and pastoral formation and training. It's not like hiring a woman religious who's been ministering in a parish for 30 years. I mean, it's just not. So there is that that problem. And then there's the life and dignity of the human person. Sorry about that. I need to, could you cut this for a minute and let me get rid of that phone call?
We can talk among ourselves. You never know when the Pope is going to call Phyllis. This is a problem. And so I hope you're finding it interesting. And the book, again, is Just Church, Catholic Social Teaching, Synodality, and Women. And I think as we move into conversation, we'll broaden this out so that we're seeing some of the implications of this for women's issues around the world and well beyond the Catholic situation. Yeah, Heidi Schlump reminds us in the chat, and please feel free to use the chat, that there are reviews of Phyllis's book, one of which was can be found in the National Catholic Reporter. There are others, I think, so you can look those up. Phyllis, you're back. Did you give the Pope our best? You need to unmute, Phyllis. Unmute yourself, dear. Okay. Yeah. There you go. And you gave our best greetings to the Pope.
I did. Excuse me for neglecting to mute my phones. Anyway, the problem of 47,000 deacons, all good men, but many of them not fully employed or even fully trained, and that's that counteracts the point. But as we go through the business of Catholic social teaching and women, and I'll just read down the list: the dignity of work and the rights of workers, life and dignity of the human person, the problem of solidarity, the care for God's creation, the call to family, community, and participation, the option for the poor and the vulnerable, rights and responsibilities. If you pull out within those categories, as well as within the actual synodal documents, as you continue in this section, you will find that there is an increasing recognition of the value of women, but only externally. That is, the church is speaking externally to the value of women, and to the protection of women, and the protection of women and the family, and the protection of the rights of women workers, and the protection of all things relative to women, that the church is willing to protect. And yet, internally, it does not seem to have been living up to what it talks about. And that to me is just criminal. And you know, even when you speak to people about women workers in the church, at dinner last night, a guest was horrified to learn that women religious had to pay rent in convents of parishes that they worked in, and had to pay for their own food, transportation, retreats, insurance, all sorts of things. Maybe not insurance, depending on the diocese. Whereas that is not the case with secular clerics who are working in the same parish. And so when you extend these, and then you look at the parish secretary, and you could just pick at random, pick any parish website, and I think you will find that the parish secretary is a part-time employee, probably 19 hours, at least in the state of New York. If you're not 20 hours, you're not required to have benefits. And yet the other workers, if there are other workers, if they are male, are full-time workers. And this is replicated in parish after parish. Now you'll say, "Oh, I'm in a terrific parish, and we have a full-time parish life coordinator who's woman, and we have full-time catechists who are women, and we have full-time." Fine, that's great. Keep it up. But in too many places, that is not the case, and it's very upsetting to me personally, as well as professionally. So I give you a brief history of synods. I don't go through the whole 9 yards, but because we'd be here, I would have written a 5,000 word book, and that's the important point. Sometimes you'll read some of the commentary, and it's as if the synods were invented at the Second Vatican Council. Well, that's just not true. I know this from my own studies. I think of the Synod of Epaon, which locally didn't want women deacons. I think of the local Synod of Paris that talks about how stupid women are. So there are plenty of local synods here, there, and everywhere to look at. And of course, our Orthodox brothers and sisters have a much deeper understanding of synods and synodality than we do. But I go through the synods that Francis has done, and they are increasingly interested in the question of women. It is my, shall we say, intuition that the Holy Father is recognizing increasingly that the Church has a distinct problem with women. I saw it as no surprise to you, but I think it's finally getting through the purple and red wall to him that the Church needs to do something about the way it treats women and the way it refers to women. So then we go to the section on women in the Church, and I talk about in detail, really, the questions of governance, jurisdiction, the problem of clericalism, and as is my wont, give a history of women in the diaconate. So just because I know I'm not supposed to talk too long, and we started at 8. So begin with the book begins, and I'm quoting from the actually from the good review that Maureen O'Connell gave me in the National Catholic Reporter online about a month ago. It has since been published in today's version, or today's edition of the National Catholic Reporter. The September 13th National Catholic Reporter has this review in print. And the way Maureen explains that the problem of Catholic social teaching, you begin with an application of ad intra, application of Catholic social teaching by looking at the lived experience of women within and beyond the church. Okay, so that's the beginning. I mean, I actually talk about Oliver Twist in it, or Charles Dickens' discussion of the way things were in Coketown, which is kind of predictive of Leo XIII's encyclical on Catholic social teaching. Anyway, then to synodality, okay, the protagonism of women, which, as I said, increases throughout the synods done by Pope Francis, and is increasing throughout his papacy. I've been criticized by some about the way I discuss the application within the Vatican, within the Curia, of the people who have been appointed. But I think if you look closely at the people who have been appointed, these are women who have already been working very closely with the synod. So it's not as simple as looking up from his desk and seeing Sister so-and-so over there and saying, yeah, put her in that slot. But the first wave of individuals who are appointed to curial positions, realistically speaking, have been there already. However, that is moving and there is becoming a further reach. How is he getting this further reach? The further reach is coming because he's consulting more people. And who's he going to consult? He's going to consult his cardinals and bishops around the world. Well, that's good because he has more cardinals and bishops, or at least more cardinals from more places in the world. He's increasingly nominating people who are from the peripheries, and the periphery really is the center. And as Yeats wrote, the problem is, can the center hold? So then finally we have the question of women, and I do talk about the historical precedents and the current developments about two things: the lay clerical tensions, which are clearly there. I mean, clericalism is mentioned in the synodal documents, and it's something that needs to be addressed, but there needs to be a careful distinction between clericalism and being clericalized. Because being clericalized means one becomes a cleric, and since the 1983 Code of Canon Law, one becomes a cleric. The ordinary means, this is what the canon says, the ordinary means of entering the clerical state is by ordination to the diaconate. That's it, period. So, so if we accept the fact that women can become clerics, this is the way it will happen. And we can talk more about why that might be important. So, as you know, the synod opens on the 4th of October, the now transposed or transferred feast of St. Francis of Assisi. He will be publishing part 2 of Laudato Si at that time. I know he has a deep interest in the climate and in environmental questions. You can look in the papers today, nearly 6,000 people have drowned in Libya, all over the world. There are earthquakes, I think 5 recently. So that will happen in that small period of time from October 4th to the 29th of this year. And then again, they'll meet in the following October of 2024. And it's a beautiful time to be in Rome. Not that they had my commission there. We met in November, March, September, and June. The best months are October and May and April and May if you're planning a trip. But to go over there in October, you have nearly 450 persons. Most of them bishops, priests, one deacon, Gert de Kuba from Belgium, many religious, and some secular lay persons. Now, of that, and I'll just give you some numbers here, 364 are voting members, and the rest are experts or facilitators. But and then of the total of the whole bunch there, the 450, 273 are bishops. That would include the cardinals who are coming from their diocese, the cardinals who are coming from their curial offices, and the cardinals who are members of the Synod Committee. So 273 bishops, including cardinals. I didn't break them out. 67 priests, 37 non-ordained men and women, and 70 other laymen and women, and then one deacon. So you have more than 100, almost, not quite a quarter, probably something like 22% of the people at this synod will be are secular or religious lay person. Why does this matter? Well, apparently there are proposals to be coming out after the synod. And if you don't know, I find it interesting. The synod itself will not take place in the synod hall. The synod will take place in the aula, in the Paul VI hall, which is where you see the public audiences held from basically November to till it gets better, basically November till April. And they will be seated at round tables. I think somebody told me 10 or 12 round tables. That would include members and experts and facilitators. So I think it's 10, 1, and 1. And then it's going to be a barn dance. So I think they will be seated at tables for week 1, and then they will be reassigned. And then they will be seated at tables for week 2, and then they'll be reassigned. And then week 3, and then they'll be reassigned. And I think that's a fascinating point. Any of you who do facilitation, this eliminates the possibility of a group being controlled by a single individual or idea, and allowing the group to be really guided by the Holy Spirit. The event is beginning with a 3-day retreat. And I was told recently by a bishop in the Western Hemisphere that some bishops wrote and said, well, I'm too busy to go to the retreat, but I'll show up for the synod. And the Pope responded, if you're too busy to go to the retreat, please name someone else to have your place. And I was like, whoa, talk about mic drop. So he will, there'll be a 3-day retreat, then part one. Part one is how this is going to happen. Explains the cookbook, as Cardinal Grech calls the Synod document, the Instrumental Laboris. Part 2, as I said earlier, is communion. Part 3 is mission, and part 4, week 4, is participation. Now, having said that, the fact of the matter is that the Instrumental Laboris, which came out after I wrote this book talks about what happened in the national assemblies. The Instrumental Laboris recognizes that most of the continental assemblies, that'd be the national assemblies, the USCCB, in Australia, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, France, Germany, certainly, pretty much the United Kingdom. I'm just thinking of the ones that I mentioned in the book and that I have read. Most of the continental assemblies and the synthesis of several episcopal conferences call for the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate to be considered. Is it possible to envisage this, and in what way? And that's where we return to see, judge, act. Opinion is not fact. The group needs facts to discern with. I hope that this little book is a contribution to the way Catholic social teaching, which is a big part of the Synod, it's not only about women. Well, and also there are not only in the Instrumentum Laboris, there is the taint of this, but in some national and diocesan reports, at least in the United States, women are considered a group, along with the disabled, you know, the mentally incompetent, and women, which I find a little bit annoying. And the other thing is that, in any event, so the responses of the seven continental assemblies have brought the Instrumentum Laboris and brought the Synod office to this decision. Most of the continental assemblies and the synthesis of several Episcopal conferences call for the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate to be considered. Is it possible to envisage this, and in what way? That's my business. I have one answer. Other people have different answers. They say, as Cardinal Casper said in 2006, well, we can call them deaconesses and they can dress up and they can have altar service, but we won't ordain them. And that's that is a recurring theme in the discussion. So with that, I am at 8, and I'm supposed to stop. So excuse me for the slight interruption, but it'd be more fun, I think, to take your questions. So have at it, however you do it.
The way we do it is I say thank you to you, Phyllis Zagano, for laying out the contours of just church, Catholic social teaching, synodality, and women. You've taken us into the synodal weeds, I would say, for those who are not living this out in a day-to-day way, and I think it's been very helpful. We turn now to our discussion, cognizant of the time limits, but very eager to hear from as many participants as we can. So the floor will be open for discussion. I invite you to use the raise hand function, which is down on the bottom of your screen and most of these devices where it says reactions, and you can simply press the button that says raise hand, and I will demonstrate raise hand. And if, as you finish your comment, you lower your hand. And if for some reason this is uncomfortable for you or not possible, there's always the old wave in the Zoom frame, or there's the old Catholic school pound your chest and say, stir, stir, sister, I have the answer. That's another possible way to do it. But we'll try to get as many of you in as possible. As I said earlier, I will close the official session at 2 with gratitude to Phyllis, who of course is more than welcome to stay longer. And all who wish to be gracefully take their leave at that point may do so. Others who want to stay on for a few minutes are welcome, but no one is obliged. I am very confident our conversation will not be finished at that point, but I urge you again to get the book and continue to ponder these matters yourself and with your colleagues. So let me open the floor, and I have a list of questions as well. So there'll be plenty of conversation to be had. And again, with deep thanks to you, Phyllis, for taking this time and for joining us in this busy period before the Synod. I'm going to start with Kate McElway, who from Women's Ordination Conference, who has her hand up first. And go right ahead, Kate. Welcome.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Phyllis. I put my question in the chat, actually. I'm just wondering, Phyllis, what your sense is within the Synod members and even of the Pope of the importance of an ordained diaconate. And I know in some of the Synod documents, they didn't say ordained diaconate, and I just wonder what your sense is of that, the importance of that understanding in the conversations.
Yeah, well, we'll back up a little bit. In the document for the Continental Stage, the term a female diaconate was used, and I got a little upset and made a few phone calls. And the response I got from the writers of the document for the Continental Stage was threefold. One said, well, I didn't want to take sides. I said, well, you are taking sides. If you say a female diaconate, that implies something else. Another one said, oh, what's the difference? I said, and the third writer said, for me, it meant ordained women. So I ordain women as deacons. Now, I said that, and then the Instrumentum Laboris came out, and the Instrumentum Laboris, it speaks about including women in the diaconate, and how can that happen? And again, that might be able to be read both ways, but I think it's a little stronger in saying, put up or shut up. This topic has been kicked down, the can has been kicked down the road for too long. In 1971, I'm told, Paul VI asked either the ITC or a scholar named Cipriano Bagaggini, what about women in the diaconate? And he wrote, it was a long paper, and Bagaggini was a member of the ITC, wrote a long paper and basically said, no big deal. Yeah, women can be ordained as deacons. That never became an ITC document, but it was published in 1974 in Orientalia Periodica Christiana by Robert Taft, a Jesuit, now dead, who told me that story, that's what happened, and that's why he published that paper. Then you move to 1997, and the 1992 to 97 quinquennaria of the International Theological Commission had the question before them. They wrote a 17-page paper which said, yeah, women deacons are no big deal. It was printed, it was numbered, it was voted on by the entire International Theological Commission, but it was not promulgated by the president, one Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. And I was told this by a member of the ITC who helped write the paper. And then we had my commission, and then there was another commission after mine, which met in September of 2021 and in July of 2022. Now, the documents that they wrote and the documents that we submitted were never published. I have no idea what the Holy Father got on my and our behalf, because the final report and the transmission letter was not shared with the commissioners. We got a thank you note that was sent to Cardinal Ladaria from the Pope, but I can't be clear on what he got. And of course, I can't comment on, I've read very interesting reports on what we said. So I'm kind of in the dark as well, because all of that is, if they saw what the Pope got, then have at it, good for them. But I have no idea what he got. So I can't say that the reports are even correct, because I just don't know. In terms of the importance of the ordained diacon, I think the Holy Father understands two things. I think he understands that it's about time for an answer. It's gone on too long. It was brought up on the floor and also in the coffee bars at the Second Vatican Council, and certainly been a matter of discussion at the curial level for a long time. And of course, I've made a little contribution to the conversation as well. And he's had himself a couple of things. I think he understands that it's time to have an answer. And I say myself, if the answer is no, then say it. I will tell you that 30 years ago, I was told by the highest placed woman in the Vatican, Sister Marjorie Keenan, a religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary who worked at Justice and Peace, that they can't say no. They just don't want to say yes. And as a result, they'll be kicking it down. Well, they have been for a long time. The other thing is, I think the Holy Father knows that if he has a negative decision, it would have a somewhat disastrous impact on relations within the church, and also with the church and the world, because of the impact the church has on the question and value of women around the world. all of the discussion, all of the arguments against me in person and in writing, including from curial members, or not so much curial members, but people who work in the curia, is that women can't image Christ. And I say, well, that's heretical. And then they get mad at me. So, you know, to say no, and actually the people who painted themselves into this corner are the people who wrote the 2002 document on the diaconate, published by the International Theological Commission, with a bad English translation. Read it in French if you can, which calls the deacon in persona Christi servi. I mean, we all serve in persona Christi, but this comment that women cannot be in persona Christi, and particularly in persona Christi servi, got attached to in persona Christi capitis ecclesiae, which means women, the priest. The priest is in the person of Christ, the head of the church. And so there's this joining that happened almost 20 years ago now, that basically says that women can't, that to agree that women can be ordained as deacons to serve and be in persona Christi servi means women can be serve in the person of Christ. So they literally painted themselves into a corner. So either they say women cannot image Christ, or they say women can image Christ. And then, while it's not my study, if they say women can image Christ, then it moves into Kate's area. So I think he understands how important this is. And even today, I read, I think in the esteemed National Catholic Reporter, an interview with the Lutheran bishop, woman bishop, and Catholic cardinal of Sweden, the Carmelite man who I've met. Actually, is a lovely gentleman, and he even wrote, it would be difficult to stop at the diaconate, and I think that's the next step. That's the problem they're trying to figure out. Well, here's a news flash. Cardinal John O'Connor told me that 30 years ago. That and again about 20, 30, it's at least 30 years ago. He said, they can't figure out how to have women deacons without implying women priests. They just can't figure it out. And I say, well, that's not my study. The diaconate is not the priesthood. The diaconate does not imply the priesthood, given that since the Second Vatican Council, and certainly since 1972, the cursus honorum, the lockstep, if you're going to be a deacon, you have to be on your way to priesthood. That's kind of been abandoned, and it only became legal or law in the 12th century. So, I think he gets it. I think he gets it, and to his credit, I think he's trying to figure it out and to build consensus around the topic. So, but I don't want to, we only have about 10 minutes, so let me.
I want to get to the conversation. Kate, if you have a quick follow-up, you could certainly offer it at this point, particularly on this last. Okay, no, particularly on this last question. The relationship, the adamant claim that the diaconate does not relate to presbyterate, which kind of is a tough sell for people of a certain age who grew up during a period when the transitional diaconate was rather common. So, I guess my question would be, how should it work? Not the question of how has it worked, but how should it work? So that might be something to spend some time on at a maybe later point. Somebody else got a question here?
Well, I can address that briefly while you're thinking.
Sure, why don't you do that? And I've got another one. So
the thing is, Mary, that in the early church, the deacon worked for the bishop and the priest worked for the bishop. And when you came to the liturgy, you brought your gift to the deacon, and there was the procession of the gifts to the deacon, and the wine and bread that was brought became the stuff of the Eucharist. And on your way out, if you needed a chicken, you got it from the deacon. If you needed an egg, you got it from the deacon. If you needed a blanket, you got it from the deacon. And the last person on line to get paid was the priest. Now, by the 12th century, particularly in Rome, that fact combined with the fact that in Rome, at least, we had 36 or 37 deacons who were elected as Pope and became the Bishop of Rome without being ordained as a priest. So it was around the 12th century that the canons were established, Gratian established, and the progression of deacon, priest, bishop. Not that it wasn't there before, but now it became legal to the point that you weren't a deacon unless you were on the way to be a priest. So we have over 50 years of experience of something that's infelicitously called the permanent diaconate. There's one order of deacon. So we have 47,000 men, many of them, most of them married, a few who are religious, and they have accepted the diaconate as a permanent vocation. And my point is, if you need deacons, then you need women deacons. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I get your point. My point is, or my question really is, the flaw or the fly in the ointment is that it's not the relationship is not between the deacon, it seems to be in the 21st century, between the deacon and the bishop, or between the priest and the bishop, but in fact between the deacon and the priest and the community. And once you begin to flip in that direction, then things look quite different, both in terms of how priesthood is imagined and how diaconate is imagined, but particularly not imagined in relationship to bishops. So I worry with this synod that there are so many people, at least I don't know all the makeup, but it seems to me that many of them are rather characterized not so much by their views pro or con on a particular issue, but about their willingness to play the game. In other words, to agree that some issues, for example, priesthood, are off limits while diaconate is within the limits, or they won't fuss about doing all the talking, about having none of the decision-making power finally. I just wonder, as you know, people of the Amazon found that out, that the reason why they didn't get what they seemed to want in large numbers was this question of consensus. So that needs to be teased out some. And I just worry about a kind of polite exercise of ships passing in the night, no real fireworks, and a reification of the same model where the Pope is finally has final decision-making and majority.
Well, the Pope does have final decision making, and that doesn't bother me. Somebody has to be at the end of the line. In terms of it being all inside baseball, I can argue that both ways. For example, with the Continental Assembly for North America, 56% of the people who were discussing the document for the Continental stage, 56% of them were diocesan employees. And, it's pretty obvious that they are insiders. And yes, of course, by default anyway, because of the ordinary makeup of the synod, you have the curial offices, you have the bishops who are assigned, but you'll note from the United States that half of the bishops going agree with Francis and half of them don't. In terms of reaching a consensus, I think the consensus has to be more that the church needs the ministry of women, and let the Pope decide how he's going to do that and how he can do that. Because you'll never have agreement on whether women were in the past ordained sacramentally, and history alone is not dispositive. You'll never have an agreement, I don't think, of whether women deacons are a good idea unless you try it. It was brought up to me lately, actually yesterday, by Philip Lawler, the editor of Catholic Culture. Oh, well, you have to consider the Orthodox. Well, the Orthodox women are very, very active about restoring women to the diaconate. The St. Phoebe said there's a lot of stuff going on, so, but I didn't tell them that. But I think that you need to remember in See, Judge, Act. You see the facts, you judge them in the light of the Holy Spirit. The synod will, as I said earlier, 3 days of prayer, then the first part, then a half day of prayer before each of the next 3 parts. So he is trying to, it's a synod on synodality also. It's not a synod on women, but the synod on synodality in and of itself has to imply a synod on women, because the inclusion and the discussion of the question of women, whether or not you want to recognize yourself as part of the various groups of the disabled and the mentally incompetent. And then also women that you or in one document I said I saw it was this big list of people like that, which includes women. That was in a diocesan report in the United States. But he has made decisions in the past, and he may make a decision. He certainly he's not afraid of the consequences, I don't think. I think he was concerned about schism. I think he's less concerned about schism at this point because the Orthodox are on board. The German-speaking and Nordic countries are on board, and with women deacons. And the criticism that would be levied is, oh, it's only halfway. It's like, well, no, this is about synodality. What in the I wrote an article on Commonweal, which you might want to post.
Yeah, I'm going to move to Teresa's to always questions so we can get more voices in here. No, that's okay. It's there's so much. It's so rich, and I appreciate your expertise and especially respect your views. Go ahead, Teresa. Unmute yourself, dear.
My question is more about governance. When you mentioned that things would be somewhat different in the way that previous meetings of this kind had been, you mentioned, as did the National Catholic Reporter in an article recently, that perhaps the change from, kind of the pyramid that we're always used to in terms of governance at these meetings, that having a circular kind of governance might make a difference. Is that so from your point of view? Do you think that will make a difference? Do you think that having the round tables, I'm calling them the stable table, kind of way of meeting will get women mentioned at all, or do you think this will make any difference?
Well, if you read the Instrumental Laboris, you can't avoid it. I mean, you can't avoid the question of women. It's all over the place. In terms of the point of governance, there is a canon that says that laity can only cooperate but not share. And that particular canon in the writing of the 1983 Code of Canon Law, that particular canon was drafted by Cardinal Ratzinger. And the question, the argument was about cooperate or share. And his word, cooperate, won. That at the end of the story is the laity can only cooperate with the hierarchy or with clerics in governance. I mean, that's so. But it's also incumbent, and that's elsewhere in law, and one would hope in practice, it's incumbent on the people of God to make their needs known. And I think this is an opportunity, the synodal process is an opportunity to have people, male and female, make the needs of the church known. I don't think that every man attending the synod is so dense to think that they don't have to talk about the question of women in the church at the synod. I just don't. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Teresa, for your question. Thanks, Phyllis, for your response. I'm going to take one more question, and it's going to be quick because we're really at our time. But Maureen, just very quickly, and Phyllis even faster, and I'll close us off, and then we'll move into continued conversation for those.
Okay, sharing sounds like an option, and cooperating sounds like yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. So I find that that's hard. I like the sense of the tables changing each week and prayer in between them. That's full of hope. And the other thing is, I think there's 30 women here. We're concerned about this. But the rest of the world and the women in the pews in North America and Europe, I don't think are that concerned. Am I wrong, Phyllis? Please.
Well, I'm not that they're not concerned. I think some of them don't even know it. They don't know there's certainly in my diocese, you'd never know there was a synod. I was just interviewed by Newsday, which is the local paper here, and I got a nice centerfold article, but we had to be a little bit It says it's time for women deacons. Well, I think the bishop might have been surprised to know that, because they've done absolutely nothing about the synod in the Diocese of Rockville Centre here on Long Island. And the writer who interviewed me had heard nothing about the synod. So it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know. And so efforts such as those of Water and other organizations to promulgate the notion of discussion, as well as the need for discussion about women in the church, I think is what we can all be grateful for right now.
Thank you so much, Phyllis Zagano, for getting us into I think what could be a very prolonged, very prolonged conversation. And it's just so impressive to see both the stamina and the integrity with which you pursue this work, Phyllis, and I want to thank you for it. As I say, we don't always agree on these things, but I have absolute confidence in your integrity and your commitment to this issue, and I really respect that very deeply. I also want to acknowledge the work of so many people around the screen and other organizations who are bringing pieces of this puzzle together.